Man ridicules a quiet passenger in first class. What happens when he learns it's Mark Zuckerberg will stun you. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin was serene, a quiet hum of the engines enveloping the passengers in luxury. Mark Zuckerberg, dressed in a simple gray sweater, sat by the window, lost in his thoughts. He was traveling anonymously, avoiding the usual media frenzy. Everything seemed peaceful until a sharp, accusatory voice shattered the calm. An elderly man with a stern expression and piercing eyes stood in the aisle, pointing directly at Mark. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" the man sneered, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of every passenger. "Sitting there, acting like you own the world. People like you ruin society." Mark looked up, his face a mix of surprise and confusion. He hadn't spoken a word since boarding the flight, yet here he was, the target of an unprovoked attack. The stewardess approached quickly, trying to de-escalate the situation, but the man refused to calm down. Passengers began whispering among themselves, trying to figure out who the man was addressing. Some even started filming the encounter, their curiosity piqued. Mark, however, remained seated, his calm demeanor contrasting the man's fiery outburst. But what no one knew was that the truth behind this moment would soon shock everyone in the cabin and leave the elderly man regretting his words forever. The tension in the cabin grew as the elderly man's voice echoed. Passengers leaned forward, their interest intensifying with each passing second. The stewardess gently placed her hand on the man's arm, urging him to return to his seat, but he shook her off with a huff. "People like him," the man declared, his finger still pointed at Mark, "pretend to care about the world while sitting on billions. They hide behind their tech empires, exploiting people. I've seen your face on TV. You're Mark Zuckerberg, aren't you? Well, you should be ashamed." Mark stayed silent, his calmness beginning to unsettle those watching. His expression was unreadable, and for a moment it seemed like he wouldn't respond. But then he slowly stood up, his height imposing yet non-threatening. His eyes locked with the elderly man's, and he spoke softly, yet his words carried weight. "Sir, I understand your frustration," Mark said, his tone steady. "But you don't know the full story. I'm just here like everyone else trying to get to my destination." The man scoffed, crossing his arms. "The full story? Oh, I think we all know the full story. Greedy billionaires like you don't care about the rest of us." Several passengers gasped, wondering how this confrontation would end. A woman whispered to her seatmate, "Why isn't he fighting back? Is he guilty of something?" Meanwhile, others stared at Mark, searching for a crack in his composure. What they didn't realize was that Mark had been holding back a truth that would change the dynamic entirely, and when it came out, it would leave the man, and everyone else, speechless. Mark took a deep breath, his gaze steady as he addressed the elderly man. "Sir, I understand your perspective," he began, his voice calm but tinged with sincerity. "But there's more to me than what you've read in headlines or seen on TV. And maybe there's more to you, too." The man frowned, caught off guard by the unexpected response. "What's that supposed to mean? Don't try to turn this around on me." Mark stepped slightly into the aisle, now fully facing the man. "I don't know your story," he said softly, "but I know pain when I see it. You're angry, and it's not just about me. Maybe it's about something deeper, something personal." The cabin fell silent. Mark's words hung in the air, and for the first time the man seemed to falter. His confidence wavered, replaced by something almost vulnerable. He opened his mouth to speak, but stopped himself, his eyes darting to the floor. The stewardess, sensing the shift in energy, glanced at Mark with a mix of relief and curiosity. The passengers, too, watched in silence, their earlier judgment now replaced by intrigue. What was Mark trying to say? Why was he so calm? And most importantly, what truth was he about to reveal? Mark continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've made mistakes, just like anyone else. And I've faced criticism, sometimes fair, sometimes not. But there's something you don't know about why I'm here today. Something that might change the way you see me and maybe even yourself." The man's face softened, his anger dimming into something more fragile. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. Mark glanced around the cabin, his next words poised to break open the truth. "I'm not here as a CEO today. I'm here as a person, and the reason I'm on this flight is because of someone I lost. Gasps rippled through the cabin. The passengers who moments ago were riveted by the drama now leaned in closer, desperate to hear what Mark would say next. Even the elderly man looked stunned, his bravado crumbling. Mark's next words promised to unveil the depth of his pain, a revelation no one saw coming. Mark's voice wavered slightly as he began to share what no one expected. "A few months ago," he said, glancing down for a moment as if steadying himself, "I lost someone very close to me. My mentor, someone who shaped the person I am today. He wasn't just a guide. He was like family." The elderly man's hardened expression softened further, and the passengers exchanged uneasy glances. The cabin, once filled with whispers, now held a tense silence as Mark continued. "He taught me that success means nothing if it isn't used to help others, and I know I haven't always lived up to that ideal. But I'm here today because I'm flying to honor him, his memory, his legacy." Mark's eyes glistened, though he remained composed. "I'm not flying first class because I want luxury. I'm flying because I'm attending his memorial, and I'm giving a speech in his honor." He believed in second chances, and in understanding people before judging them. The elderly man who had stood so defiantly just moments before seemed to shrink in his place. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice caught. The stewardess, still standing nearby, rested a hand on his arm as if silently encouraging him to listen. Mark looked directly at the man, his tone gentle. "I know you see someone like me and think I represent all the things you hate about the world, and maybe I do in part. But today, I'm not here as a CEO or a billionaire or a public figure. I'm here as someone who's grieving, just like anyone else would." A quiet murmur swept through the cabin as passengers absorbed his words. Some looked down, others exchanged solemn glances. And the elderly man? He seemed frozen, as though everything he thought he knew had been turned upside down. Finally, Mark stepped back, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You don't have to like me, sir, but before judging someone, consider that their story might be different from what you expect." The man's hand trembled slightly as he clutched the seat in front of him. His face, once flush with anger, now held the weight of regret. But the most shocking moment was still to come because the man was about to reveal something that no one on the flight could have anticipated. The elderly man exhaled deeply, his hand gripping the seat as if it was the only thing keeping him upright. He looked at Mark, his hardened eyes now glistening with tears. The silence in the cabin was heavy, the anticipation almost unbearable. Then, his voice cracked as he spoke. You remind me of my son," the man admitted, his tone no longer harsh but filled with pain. "I lost him 2 years ago. He was ambitious, driven, just like you. He believed in changing the world, too. But I didn't see that then. All I saw was someone I thought was too big for his own good. I judged him, pushed him away, and I never got the chance to make it right." The cabin collectively held its breath. Even Mark's calm composure seemed to falter as the man's confession poured out. "When I saw you," the man continued, his voice shaking, "it was like seeing him again, and all that anger I carried, it just came out. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Mark's face softened, and he stepped forward, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "I can't imagine your loss," he said gently, "but I think your son would want you to find peace, and to forgive yourself. Maybe today can be the start of that." The man's tears flowed freely now, and he nodded, his body trembling with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered, barely audible. The passengers, who had been captivated by the unfolding drama, began clapping softly. It wasn't for Mark nor for the man, but for the shared moment of humanity that had brought everyone together. Mark helped the man to his seat, ensuring he was comfortable before sitting back down himself. The stewardess offered the man a glass of water, her face kind and understanding. The atmosphere in the cabin, once tense with judgment, now felt lighter, almost cathartic. As the plane continued its journey, Mark looked out the window, his thoughts with his lost mentor and the lesson he had just experienced firsthand. Meanwhile, the elderly man sat quietly, holding the glass of water and reflecting on the unexpected connection he had found in the most unlikely of places. When the flight landed, the passengers disembarked, carrying with them a story they would never forget, a story of loss, regret, and the power of understanding. And that's how an unexpected moment on a flight changed two lives forever. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and challenge the mind. See you in the next video.